But first, to set the stage again on how we can control and, of course, what are the costs of the disease, both the disease and, of course, the benefit of controlling the disease. Without further ado, I give you our economist, in-house economist, Mr. Lance Mulberry.
All right. Well, thank you for the warm introduction, Carlo. Yes, so we're going to be talking about the cost of mixed infections and the value of vaccination. And the goal of this presentation is to help you think a little bit more like an economist. And so to kick things off, we're going to start with a poll question. So we have, what is the best measure of efficiency on a farm? Is it 1, feed efficiency, 2, pigs weaned and or the kilograms marketed, so throughput, variation or uniformity, and finally, profit. So which of these options is the best measure of efficiency on the farm? So we'll bring up the Slido. You can scan that and submit your answers. All right. So as these come in, this will be a good test of, we actually touched a little bit on this. There was a question asked that's very closely related to this. Maybe everyone's, oh, there we go. All right. 57% have said profit, with a next coming in feed efficiency, then an even split between throughput and variation. So someone asked earlier about variation and how important it should be as a key performance indicator. So I thought that maybe that might trick you. So let's go on to now the answer. The correct answer is, of course, profit. So most of you are already thinking like economists, because profit is the most important variable, the single most important variable in measuring efficiency on our farms. And so what exactly is profit? Well, that's an easy answer. Revenue minus costs, and we have profit. It's very simple, right? Well, I'm going to add a little complexity to it. When we talk about costs, we have to think about accounting costs, but also economic costs. And that's one that goes overlooked a little bit. And so we might be able to rephrase it and say that costs are not just expenditures, but anything that would reduce profit. So let's start to rethink costs a little bit as our foundation. So here we have some typical accounting costs. This is not an exhaustive list, but we have feed, labor, medication, the site and utilities costs, and financing, so interest payments and things like that. Then on the economic cost side, like I said, these are not as obvious, but we have growth rates, mortality, variation, which we've talked about earlier today, and things that are outside of our control like inflation. But specifically, when we think about disease and where disease impacts us the most economically, on the accounting side, it's going to impact our feed efficiency. It's going to impact labor. We're going to have to put in more work managing the disease. Our medication costs will go up. But on the economic cost side, we're going to see deteriorating growth rates. We're going to see increased mortality and increased variation. So accounting costs, when disease hits it, we have more money going out of the farm. And on the economic cost side, we decrease the amount of money coming in. And so typically, with accounting costs, those are pretty obvious. It's very easy to see the increased amount of money that we're spending. But on the economic cost side, it's not so obvious how that is impacting us financially. We know these things are hurting us, but how? Well, when we talk about economic costs, we're really talking about opportunity costs. That's an economic term. And the very simple definition of that is it was the opportunity to make money, but we missed that opportunity. So let's put this in a little bit of a example. So here on our farm, we have weaned pigs that cost us $44 per head. All of our accounting costs come to about $126 per head. So to break even on this farm, we need $170. And so the question then becomes, well, how are our finished pigs going to deliver that $170 or more? Well, that is largely going to be determined by these factors here: growth rate, mortality, variation. All of these variables will impact the value of the pigs that we're producing. And so any negative impact reduces profit because it's reducing our revenues coming in. So again, we call that opportunity cost. So just a very simple example to illustrate opportunity cost. Let's just say we have 10 pigs. We're about ready to put them on a truck and take them to market, and each of those pigs is worth $50. So we're expecting $500 in profit. However, as we're loading the pigs onto the truck, one of them dies, and so we actually earned just $450. So the difference between what we could have made and what we actually made, that's opportunity cost. So when we think about disease, we can't just think about the accounting costs, we also have to consider the opportunity costs. Put those together, and that's your total cost of disease. And a quick sidebar note, when it comes to feed, that one can be a little tricky because your cost of feed in a disease outbreak might go down because you have more pigs dying, so less consumption, and they might be inappetent. So keep an eye out for that. The thing to look for is that your feed efficiency will decrease. So what we have here, this is from a study conducted a few years back. What you're looking at is each row is an individual pig. They were challenged at different levels with PRRS, and their temperatures were recorded each day. And what you'll see from all of this is that disease impacted each one of these animals differently, which means disease impacts animals differently and impacts herds differently. And so with that differential impact, we're going to have a differential economic outcome. So looking at the range of possible impacts, here we have PRRS and MICO. The way to read this chart is this is the percent reduction in growth rate, so along the bottom axis there, that's the percentage reduction in growth rates. Here we have our cumulative curve here, so that sums up as you go along and add up each of those bars, it'll eventually sum to 100%. And what we're saying with that is 100% of the time, when you get PRRS and MICO, you will have a up to 38% reduction in growth rates, which is all well and good, but where the value of this information comes in is when we put in quartiles like this. And so what we're saying is that 25% of the time, growth rates could be decreased by up to 7%. 50% of the time, they could be decreased up to 15%. And 75% of the time, they could be decreased by up to 21%. So now we're starting to get an idea of the range and likelihood of these impacts. So doing the same exercise, but now with mortality. So this is the percentage increase in mortality rates. Again, we have our quartiles. So 25% of the time, mortality rates would go up 23%. 50% of the time, they go up 30%. 75% of the time, they go up 37%. Finally, they could go up as high as 71. So we have this information. Let's put it into a practical exercise, and this is something that you can do on your farms. It's a very simple way of looking at this. So here we have scenario 1, a healthy farm with different metrics coming in here. We have our prices for different things, wean pigs, feed, our other costs, and the sale price per kilogram for the pigs, and some production metrics for our hypothetical farm. So how many pigs we placed, mortality, what our average daily gain is, our target weight, and how much variation is present in the herd. So what we're looking at, since we're very curious about the economic costs, like I said, since they're not so obvious, we're going to be changing average daily gain, mortality, and variation to look at what kind of economic impact that will have on our case study farm. So here's a summary of costs and a summary of some of our production performance. So how many pigs we finished, how much we had in sales. Because of the amount of variation, how many penalties did we receive? So when I talked earlier about Know Your Packer matrix, this is one of the reasons why you really want to understand it. How many days it took us to get our pigs to market weight, and how many turns it took, or marketings per year. And just so that we're all on the same page, here's how I calculate the number of turns. So it's just 365 days in a year, plus days to marketing, plus any additional days that you need to clean the barn and get it loaded. So now scenario 2, we have a mild outbreak on our farm. So we see now highlighted in red what variables have changed. Our mortality has gone up, average daily gain has gone down, and the standard deviation has increased. So we see our accounting costs, not much of a change there, because we are, like I said, focusing really on these production performance issues. So now looking at the economic costs. So we see we've finished fewer pigs, our base sales have gone down, penalties have gone up because we now have more variation. So our gross sales have taken a big hit, more days to market, which then means fewer groups marketed in a year. So our annual profitability has taken a big hit. Now moving on to a severe outbreak. Again, here we have our metrics. Our accounting costs, still more or less the same. And our economic costs. Now we see far fewer pigs being finished because of that really high mortality. Our base sales is down, but the penalties, you'll notice, have gone way up because of the amount of variation present in this herd. We see gross sales is down quite a bit. Days to market, we're selling very few groups in a year because of that slowed average growth. So now when we compare our healthy herd to the mild outbreak, we can see the difference in days to market, the difference in the number of turns that we get in a year, how many pigs we're marketing from our hypothetical farm, what our annual profit is, and then on a per head basis. So per head, we're losing $4.06 in a mild outbreak. And then bringing in the severe, you can see now we're having some very major impacts on production. And so our costs could go as high as $14.85 per head just because of the changes in mortality, standard deviation, and average growth rate. This is not taking into account any changes in labor, changes in feed costs, medications, anything like that. So just on the economic cost side, we're seeing this huge impact. So this is why I say we need to focus on profit as the first and most important variable, because when we look at profit, we're paying attention to not just our costs, but our revenues. And so we see where our revenue has fallen short. So we've had a mild case and a severe case. In reality, it might be somewhere in between. So what is the value of vaccination? We have our range of impacts, and if you want to think like an economist, your answer should be, well, it depends. So here's what it depends on. Let's make a scenario. So we have vaccine A, it costs $2 per dose, and vaccine B costs $4 per dose. How do we know that vaccine B is worth that extra cost? And what makes one vaccine better than another? If we're focused just on cost, the $2 vaccine is obviously the better choice. So let's break it down. And like I said, this is a very simple analysis. We're not relying on any fancy statistics or econometric methods. You could do this with a pen and paper and Microsoft Excel. It's very simple to do. And if you're not too sure what the disease impacts will be on your farm, talk to your vets, talk to local experts and say, okay, best case scenario, how much, what would be the impact of this disease? Or worst case scenario, what would be the impact? So we're going to start very simple with our analysis. Is the cost of the vaccine less than the cost of the disease? And so here we see, yes, indeed it is. So we can say that this vaccine provides at least $2.06 worth of value. And so then we say, well, does the vaccine protect us from economic losses? So to answer that, we need to add a little complexity. So we need to start looking at the level of protection. And so we have this, where when we get to those extreme losses, will our vaccine hold up? Will it protect us from those very severe cases? Then we need to start looking at, well, with this vaccine, what kind of safety profile does it have? Is the vaccine itself going to have any negative impacts on my herd and herd performance? And then we want to look at the pig versus herd performance. So how does this vaccine impact individual animals and not just on average? So let's get into some of those details. So in terms of the safety profile, several studies were conducted in China looking at the safety profile or the effectiveness of these vaccines and their impact that they had on growth rates and mortality. So I was looking at some flex vaccines, flex combo and circoflex versus competitor vaccines. The currency you see, that's Chinese RMB. And so we have the purchase price of the vaccine in the first column. But then after that, we see these economic costs starting to add in. So growth rates are slower, and there's more variation in these other vaccines. So it's an economic cost, meaning we're not making as much money as we would with the flex vaccines. And then mortality costs, the value of the pigs that died, plus the wasted feed that was consumed by those dead pigs. That gives us our total cost per head. So we can see some pretty dramatic differences there. And like I said, so that's the safety profile of a vaccine. We're looking at, what is the total cost of that vaccine? But then for pig and herd performance, here we have flex versus a 2-dose RTU competitor. We see that these two herds had the exact same average performance. However, the 2-dose RTU earned 82 cents US less per head. Why? Because there was a slight difference in the lightweight pigs. So when we're talking about Packer matrices, this is where you will see those little differences and be able to diagnose some of these problems. So the lightest 17% of this herd earned $2.70 less per head, which then reduced the whole herd's average performance, even though, on average growth rates were identical. So now we can start to make a good comparison of these vaccines. So we have the cost of the disease, the total cost of the vaccine. So we're comparing the impact of mortality, the impact of growth rates, And so suddenly vaccine A costs us a lot more because it's having a negative impact on our herd. So this is a very effective way and simple. Like I said, you don't need sophisticated tools to do this kind of analysis. And so I want to give you a few warnings when you go out and start to conduct these analyses on your farm. One example, and this is why we focus on profit above all else, is I've seen it done a few times where ROI, return on investment, is used as a measure of performance. So here we have two products, two different returns. We would say ROI 2 appears to be worse because 60 is less than 100. So here's a little mathematical assumption that says why that's at fault. But I would caution you, because as soon as you lose sight of profit, you miss the fact that ROI 2 earned us 400 more RMB more, even though it only cost us 20 RMB. So a better way of calculating these things, being profit-focused, is looking at changes in profitability. So from those studies I showed you earlier, this is the annual return, the annual vaccination cost. So we're looking at how profitability changes and how our vaccination cost has changed. That gives us this number here, so 6.39 RMB, which means that for every 1 RMB that we invested in these studies, we returned 6.39 more. So it was a tremendous investment. So that's why I want to tell you, always focus on profit. Don't let other metrics get in the way of that final measure of efficiency. So to wrap things up, we'll go through just a few take-home points. Like I said, profit is the most important metric for farm performance. Profit is revenue minus costs, very obvious, but we have to remember it's accounting costs and economic costs. And so disease brings us a wide array of these economic costs. And so the most accurate disease analysis for your farm is going to be specific to your farm. So I do encourage you to do this kind of analysis on your farm. Do some what-if type of analysis. What if average daily gain goes down by this much? What if it goes down by this much? Make it specific to your farm with your prices, and you'll have a much better idea of what disease costs. And then, to conclude, the value of vaccination depends on the total vaccine cost. So when we're looking at interventions, we have to consider, is our intervention having any negative impacts on our herd? So by being profit-focused, we're going to look at these opportunity costs.